After a 5-year investigation, the authorities in Indiana have sentenced a man from Kentucky. Rochelle Stubblefield was a 20-year-old college student attending Calumet College of St. Joseph in Whiting, Indiana, where she was studying criminal justice. She was ambitious, loved by her family, and preparing for one of the most important moments of her life, becoming a mother. In November 2015, Rochelle was 8 months pregnant and just weeks away from giving birth. On the evening of November 10th, Rochelle attended a basketball game at her college. It was an ordinary night, and there was no indication of what was to come. After the game, Rochelle left campus, and then she disappeared. When Rochelle failed to return home and missed calls from her family, concern quickly grew. 2 days later, on November 12th, her mother reported her missing. This was completely out of character for Rochelle, who was known to stay in close contact with her family, especially during her pregnancy. The police immediately launched an investigation. They soon discovered Rochelle's abandoned vehicle in Gary, Indiana. Inside the car were her broken eyeglasses, and nearby the investigators found a pair of red and black shoes believed to belong to Rochelle. These discoveries strongly suggested foul play. From the beginning, the detectives focused on Darren Fuller, a man Rochelle had been dating and who was believed to be the father of her unborn child. When questioned, Darren denied knowing Rochelle and claimed that he was not the father of her baby. His responses raised suspicion, but without a body or direct evidence, the investigators had little to move forward with. Months passed, and hopes of finding Rochelle alive began to fade. Her due date came and went with no sign of her. Despite extensive searches, including areas around Gary, the police found no trace of Rochelle or her unborn child. The case eventually went cold. For years, her family continued to push for answers while the investigators quietly worked behind the scenes, hoping for a breakthrough. A break in the case came in 2019, nearly 4 years after Rochelle vanished. The detectives re-interviewed individuals connected to Darren Fuller, including a woman he had been dating at the time of Rochelle's disappearance. During this interview, the woman revealed critical information. Fuller had confessed to ending Rochelle's life. According to her statement, Fuller told her that during an argument he choked Rochelle and later disposed of her belongings by throwing them out of a car window near the area where her vehicle had been discovered. He also told her that he had buried Rochelle's body near an elementary school in Gary. The police acted on this lead, conducting multiple searches of the school grounds, even using cadaver dogs. While dogs indicated possible human remains, no body was ever recovered. As the investigation continued, additional witnesses came forward, including Fuller's own relatives. Several of them told the investigators that Fuller admitted to ending Rochelle's life because he did not want to pay child support. One witness recalled Fuller saying that he had both strangled and stabbed Rochelle before disposing of her body. On the strength of these statements and corroborating evidence, the police arrested Fuller in July 2020. He was charged with 2 counts of slaying, one for Rochelle and one for her unborn child. Fuller pleaded not guilty, and the case proceeded to trial. Despite the absence of Rochelle's body, the prosecutors presented a strong case built on witness testimony, Fuller's own statements, and circumstantial evidence. In April 2023, a Lake County jury found Fuller guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 95 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. Fuller's motion for a new trial was denied. Throughout the proceedings, Fuller maintained his innocence and has never revealed the location of Rochelle's remains. To this day, her body has not been found. Her family has justice, but not closure. They continue to hope that one day her remains will be located so she can be laid to rest. It took about 3 decades to bring some sort of closure to a Texas cold case. On September 10th, 1990, at approximately 5 p.m., a man traveling along Highway 288 to Manville, Texas, had pulled over to the side of Brazoria County Road in order to relieve himself. He noticed a pile of debris and decided to investigate further. He had stepped behind a barricade and had discovered what was a human skull sitting inside of a tire, with the rest of the disarticulated skeleton laying underneath. The victim lay naked of any identification or clothing, except for a few eye-catching pieces of jewelry. Among them was a simple pearl bracelet, several rings, and most notably, a 1975 high school class ring with a bright blue stone from Robert E. Lee High School in Houston, Texas. With no name to call her, the investigators and the community began referring to the case as Princess Blue, inspired by that vivid sapphire-like ring. It is assumed that this ring was a gift from an older companion or relative. A detective had taken the jewelry and placed it in an evidence envelope. The medical examiner's findings added little clarity. The victim was believed to be Hispanic, between 15 and 19 years old, her height at 4 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 2 inches. An upper left front tooth had been surgically removed, 2 fractured ribs, and a defect on a bone beneath her left knee. No traces of opiates were found in her bone marrow. There was nothing to help identify her, no purse, clothes, or ID. Foul play was most likely suspected based on the circumstances of discovery. Eventually, the case went cold. In August 2006, almost 16 years later, a detective reopened the case file. DNA advances had disputed the previous speculation that she was of Hispanic descent or white with a Hispanic admixture. Testing indicated that she was instead white, but someone with African DNA had recently entered into her family, which was most likely a parent or grandparent. It was also discovered that the female could have been as old as 21. Efforts to identify the young woman relied in part on an investigative lead, the distinctive ring. The detectives reached out to Robert E. Lee High School's 1975 alumni, over half of the graduating class, but no one recognized the ring or the sketches created from the remains. Media coverage brought renewed attention the following year, in June 2007, when the authorities released sketches and details about the ring. Many leads came in, but none had the answer to the identity of the victim. In July of that same year, the investigators started to suspect serial offender Roy Allen Stewart might have been a possible suspect based on his presence in towns where females of a similar age bracket disappeared. Princess Blue's time of demise fits in with his time spans. Stewart refused to cooperate with the authorities and falsely stated he was in prison in 1989 and 1990. He said that he had not recognized the sketches and that he had been innocent after his release. He is, however, no longer a person of interest in the case. The case remained unsolved for another 12 years. Then, in November 2019, ABC 13's 13 Unsolved series reignited public interest and prompted renewed investigative efforts. The breakthrough arrived in June 2020, not through the ring or sketches, but via the power of DNA. Julie Gwen Davis, who had disappeared from Orange, Texas, was finally connected to the remains when her brother, Danny, had submitted his own DNA to help identify missing family members. The DNA perfectly matched the remains of Princess Blue with 99.9% certainty, revealing her true identity after 3 decades. With the identification confirmed, Julie's remains were returned to her family. Her siblings, including Danny and Stephanie, finally had the chance to lay her to rest and begin the grieving and healing process. Stephanie later spoke about keeping Julie close, wearing a purple t-shirt that read, "Who was Princess Blue? My sister, Julie Gwen Davis," and placing some of her ashes in a locket as a personal tribute. While the identification brought long-sought closure, many questions remain unanswered. The circumstances of Julie's demise are not fully understood, and the authorities continue investigating the case. The Manvel Police Department has stated that they will not rest until they uncover what happened to Julie and whether her demise was the result of foul play. But the unidentified and missing persons case is solved. What was supposed to have been a good deed turned into a decision that will be regretted forever. On the night of June 22, 1991, in the quiet town of Magnolia, Delaware, 70-year-old Dorothy Donovan was brutally slain inside her own home. Dorothy was described by her family as a kind, gentle, loving, energetic woman who loved gardening, canning vegetables, babysitting her grandchildren, and going to church. She was twice widowed and had 3 grown children named Charles Holden, Brenda Alexander, and Diana Reinhardt. She lived in a farmhouse on the family's 163-acre farm near Harrington, Delaware. She lived alone but remained closely connected to her family, particularly her son, Charles, who worked at the DuPont Company factory and lived in an adjacent trailer on the farm. On the evening of June 22nd, Charles had finished a long shift at work. Driving home, he stopped briefly at a fast food restaurant, Hardee's. After doing so, he crossed the parking lot and got in his truck. As he began to back out, he noticed a stranger standing at the driver's side window. The man asked Charles for a ride. Charles told him he was unsure if he could since it was pretty late. The man said that he was in a big-time bind, that his sister had just had a baby at Milford Memorial Hospital, and he needed to get there. Charles told him that he lived nearby so he could not take him far, but in the end, he relented and agreed to take him part of the way. Harrington was a small town, mostly friendly. He assumed that he had nothing to worry about. When Charles reached the intersection at Killen Pond Road, where he normally turned to drive the half-mile home, he said that he pulled off to the side of the road and told the man that was as far as he could take him. Charles also pointed to a nearby phone booth and told him that he could call for a ride. He became angry, saying he needed to get down the road and would not get out of the truck. Charles told him that he could not go any further and reminded him that he had previously said he could only go a few miles. The man, even angrier, said, "Listen, I got a problem and I am not getting out of this truck." Charles apologized, but told him that he could not help and that he had to get out. Without warning, he attacked. He punched Charles in the face and demanded both money and the truck. He also picked up a screwdriver from the truck's floor. Charles grabbed his keys and jumped out. The man tried to drive off but realized Charles had taken the keys. He then got out of the truck and went after Charles. Charles ran to a nearby business named Blake's Garage for help. He banged on the windows, but no one was there. The man approached him and, wielding the screwdriver, said, "I am going to end you. I am going to end you right here." Once again, he demanded that Charles give him the truck. Charles told him to calm down and said that he would take him wherever he wanted to go. As he and the man headed back to the truck, Charles quickly got in the truck and drove off before the man could reach the passenger side door. Charles sped off. He drove around for a while till he did not see the man anywhere, so he decided to head back home. But when he reached his driveway, he saw him again. He was standing in Charles's yard, looking through his trailer's windows. Somehow, the man managed to make his way to Charles's home, the same property where his elderly mother lived. He rushed to a payphone and called the police at 1:19 a.m. While he was waiting for the police, he called Dorothy several times to alert her about the man. She did not answer. The police categorized the call as low priority. At 3 a.m., Corporal Myrna Williams Kinney of the Delaware State Police arrived at the payphone and met with Charles. Charles explained the situation to the officer, and they made their way to the trailer home. Once arrived, they checked the front and back doors on the trailer home to see if the man had broken into the home. Corporal Kinney found nothing amiss. Charles asked Corporal Kinney to look at Dorothy's house, which was about 60 feet away. They walked across the yard to the back door. They then discovered that the window to it was broken. They entered the house, and Charles called out to Dorothy, but there was no response. He knew something was wrong because she normally stayed awake until he came home. In an upstairs bedroom, Charles found Dorothy's body. She had been stabbed more than 24 times in the face, arms, and chest. The police believed that her life was ended at around 1 a.m. Her purse was untouched, and nothing appeared to be missing or out of place in the house. The police ruled out robbery and indecent assault as motives. Dorothy had no known enemies. Because Charles had been the last known family member connected to Dorothy and was involved in a violent encounter that night, suspicion quickly turned toward him. The police wondered if his story of the hitchhiker was a cover-up. It was hard for them to believe that he had picked up the man, taken him a couple of miles, dropped him off, and then somehow he showed up at Dorothy's house and ended her life, despite having never met her or Charles before. During questioning, the detectives told Charles that they did not believe his story. They did not think the man could have walked a half-mile and happened upon Charles's trailer while he was driving around. They discovered that Dorothy had taken out a life insurance policy shortly before her demise and listed Charles as the beneficiary. They also learned that he was having financial problems at the time. Furthermore, he refused to take a polygraph test. The detectives did not believe Charles's story about the hitchhiker. It was not until they were able to go back and interview people at Hardee's that they determined that the man actually existed. Several people inside and outside the restaurant said that he had asked them for a ride. Some of them also saw him getting into Charles's truck. Witnesses reported seeing the man charging Charles at the intersection, and others witnessed the man walking around the trailer home before he made his way to Dorothy's house. Other evidence also confirmed Charles's story. He had injuries to his face consistent with having been in a scuffle with the man. He also had burns on his wrist from when his coffee spilled on him during the scuffle. Finally, the investigators obtained certain physical evidence at the scene: a bloody palm print on a banister and 2 sources of DNA, including blood left on the banister and light switch, neither of which belonged to Charles. Because of this, the investigators were able to eliminate him as a suspect. Dorothy's perpetrator is described as a black male in his late 20s or early 30s. He is 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 9 inches, 150 pounds, with a slender build and a pockmarked complexion. He wore brown dress pants, a brown plaid shirt, and dark, large, plastic-framed glasses with oversized lenses. Due to the extremely violent nature of the crime, the police believe that he may have been high on illegal substances at the time of the slaying. For over a decade, the case remained cold. Then, in the early 2000s, advancements in forensic science provided new hope. The investigators had preserved DNA from the crime scene when it was entered into national databases. In November 2005, the DNA database CODIS found a match: 41-year-old Gilbert E. Cannon of Delmar, Maryland. The bloody palm print was also matched to him. Cannon was living in Delaware at the time of the crime. He had previous convictions in the state for robbery, theft, escape, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, burglary, and assault. He had also served 7 years in a Maryland prison on illegal substance and robbery charges and for a 1997 slaying. Prior to his release in September 2004, Cannon's DNA was collected, which was used to connect him to this case. The police also discovered that photos of him from around the time of the crime bore a strong resemblance to the composite sketch. After the DNA match, the police were initially unable to find Cannon. That was until January 18, 2006, when he was arrested at his girlfriend's house, where he hid in her basement. He was charged with first-degree slaying, possession of a fatal weapon during a felony, and first-degree burglary. When first questioned, he denied any involvement in the case. However, when confronted with the evidence against him, he confessed. Cannon told the investigators that on that fatal night he was high on substances and was looking for more. He approached Charles at Hardee's and got a ride from him. A fight broke out when Charles would not take him any further than the intersection. He picked up a screwdriver from the truck's floor and chased Charles down. Charles agreed to drive him the rest of the way but then drove off, leaving him behind. Cannon told the investigators that he then started walking down Killen Pond Road. He passed a few houses, but they all had lights on. Looking for a place to sleep, he stopped at the first house that looked empty, which was Dorothy's. When he broke through the back door, he woke her up. Fearing that she would identify him, he attacked and stabbed her with the screwdriver he took from Charles's truck. Cannon confirmed that it was just a coincidence that he chose Dorothy's house. He said that he did not know either her or Charles. He was surprised when he found out that Charles was her son. He also confirmed that he acted alone. On April 24, 2007, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Charles said what happened is like a big nightmare for him. He says it sometimes seems like it did not really happen, like he could drive over to Dorothy's house and she would still be there, but he knows that she will not be there. Her daughter Brenda said that she meant the world to her. She called her every morning and evening. She said Dorothy was her best friend, and she misses her dearly. Her other daughter, Diana, said that if she had lost her life in a car accident or from a medical problem, she could have accepted that. She does not think anyone has the right to take someone's life away like that. Unfortunately, for several years, Charles, Brenda, and Diana did not speak to each other because they did not understand why he had given Cannon a ride. Following Cannon's guilty plea, they began to reconcile. Sadly, on August 2nd, 2020, Diana passed away at the age of 66. In 1992, a tragedy struck the George Washington National Forest in Virginia when an innocent man was brutally slain. A random crime turned strangers into enemies. But as time went on, the pair became friends. On the evening of June 7th, 1992, Sammy Edward Wheeler, a 35-year-old delivery driver, drove his 1988 navy blue Isuzu Trooper to the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. The next morning, hunters stumbled upon his SUV parked near Elkhorn Lake. What they found inside was horrifying. Sammy lay in the back seat, wrapped in a sleeping bag. He had been shot 6 times in the head and chest. Whoever was responsible had tried to erase every trace. Shell casings were gone, fingerprints wiped away. To finish the cover-up, the perpetrator stuffed paper into the gas tank and lit a cigarette in an attempt to burn the vehicle, but the fire never caught. Sammy's wallet was missing, raising early suspicions of robbery. At first, the investigators struggled to find answers. Sammy's personal life was complicated. He lived with his girlfriend, Pat Sneed, who was in the middle of a bitter separation from her ex-husband, Bob Bean. The two men disliked each other, and some wondered if that tension had led to Sammy's demise. His twin brother, Danny Wheeler, also believed there was more to the story and felt the police were not asking the right questions. In the months following Sammy's end, Danny, Pat, and Bob took turns accusing each other of the crime. In this bizarre and convoluted case, the principals agreed on only one thing. It all started when Sammy began dating Pat. In the fall of 1991, Pat moved into a rental unit owned by Danny in Staunton, Virginia. The property had been divided into separate apartments. She and her 2 sons lived in one apartment with Sammy. Danny lived in one of the others. The arrangement suited everyone, except Bob. He felt that the situation was not what was in the best interest for their sons. He had approached her and asked her to stop the living arrangement. She did not agree to it. Bob claimed that he felt forced into going to court so that he could provide some kind of moral environment for his children. In February 1992, a court order was issued that prohibited Sammy from being with Pat in the presence of her sons. To comply, Sammy moved into Danny's apartment. Bob remained suspicious. He hired a private investigator to ensure that the court order was being obeyed. The investigator later testified that Sammy had violated the court order. It is not known if the judge believed the investigator. However, according to Danny, Sammy did not violate the court order. But to be safe and to appease Bob, he stayed away from the apartment and began living in his SUV. For 6 long years, the case went cold. Then, in 1998, desperate for answers, Danny hired private investigator Alan Cates. Cates re-examined the evidence, interviewed locals, and retraced Sammy's final steps. His persistence led to a breakthrough no one expected. A man named Kirk Thomas Bell came forward and admitted that he had been there the night Sammy's life was ended. He told a chilling story. He and his friend Guy Jackson Price, a young Army soldier, had been drinking when they drove into the forest to spotlight hunt. They came across Sammy's parked SUV. Without warning, Price pulled out a rifle and opened fire into the vehicle. Later that night, the two returned to make sure Sammy was not alive anymore. Price used a second gun to fire additional shots before attempting to set the SUV on fire. Bell's confession pointed directly to Price as the shooter. The investigators recovered weapons from Price's parents' home, and ballistic testing linked one to the crime. In May 1999, Price went on trial. He denied being the perpetrator and insisted Bell had pulled the trigger, but the jury did not believe him. Price was convicted of first-degree slaying, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For Sammy's family, the conviction brought long-awaited justice, though it did not erase their pain. Price spent more than 2 decades behind bars, but in March 2020, after multiple denied requests, he was finally granted parole. Even with a conviction, the case left lingering questions. Why did Price choose Sammy's SUV that night? Was it really a random act of violence, or was there more behind it? For Sammy Wheeler's loved ones, the uncertainty remains, but the memory of the man they lost has never faded.